13,768 American soldiers died in a war you've probably never heard of. Most of them never saw combat. They died in camps, shivering with typhus, vomiting from cholera, wasting away from dysentery. And in return for those 13,000 lives, America gained half of Mexico. 1.3 million square kilometers. Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah. An area larger than Western Europe changed hands in just 2 years. 1846 to 1848. The Mexican-American War. The forgotten war that drew the borders we fight about today. Here's what makes this war truly haunt. The generals who won it: Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, William Sherman, Thomas Jackson, learned how to destroy each other in Mexican streets. 15 years later, they turned those skills on each other. The Civil War was rehearsed on Mexican soil. And Grant knew it. Years later, he would write, "The Mexican War was the most unjust war ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. Yet he fought in it bravely, killed Mexicans he had no quarrel with, followed orders he believed were wrong." That contradiction runs through this entire war. April 1846. Mexican cavalry ambushes American dragoons in disputed territory. A dozen Americans die. President James K. Polk tells Congress, "Mexico has shed American blood upon American soil." A young congressman named Abraham Lincoln demands proof. "Show me the exact spot," Lincoln insists, "where this American blood was shed on American soil." Polk never answers. The war goes ahead anyway. But this war was never really about defending Texas. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna saw through it. The Mexican general had fought Americans before, lost Texas at San Jacinto in 1836. Now, exiled in Cuba, he sends word to Washington. "Let me return," he promises. "I'll make peace." The Americans let him through their naval blockade. Within weeks, Santa Anna raises 25,000 troops and marches north. Not to negotiate, to annihilate the American army. "I fooled the Yankees," he reportedly laughs. This is a war where Irish immigrants deserted the American army to fight for Catholic Mexico, knowing they'd hang if captured. Where teenage Mexican cadets jumped from castle walls rather than surrender. Where women followed armies through deserts because without them, soldiers would starve. Where outdated British muskets failed Mexican defenders at the worst moments. Where American flying artillery revolutionized warfare. Where General Winfield Scott led 10,000 men on a march the Duke of Wellington said was impossible. This war planted the seeds of the Civil War. Every argument about slave states versus free states in the new territories, every compromise that satisfied no one, it all started here. And today, every debate about immigration and borders traces back to 1848. Back to the moment when the border didn't cross people. The border crossed them. This is the war that shaped America's borders. This is the war nobody remembers, but everybody lives with. 1821. Mexico breaks free from 3 centuries of Spanish colonial rule. The new nation stretches from the Oregon territories in the northwest all the way down to Central America. On paper, it's massive, one of the largest countries in the Americas. In reality, it's fragile. 2 factions are already tearing at each other before the ink dries on the independence documents. The centralists want power concentrated in Mexico City, a strong national government controlling everything from the capital. Conservative, often backed by the Catholic Church and wealthy landowners, they see centralized authority as the only way to hold the sprawling nation together. The Federalists want the opposite. More autonomy for state governors. Power dispersed across the regions. They look at the vast distances, the weeks it takes for orders from Mexico City to reach Texas or California, and argue that local control just makes sense. But this isn't a polite debate about governance theory. Governments change with stunning speed. Coups, counter-coups, generals marching armies not toward foreign enemies, but toward the capital. In December 1845, General Mariano Paredes is ordered to move his troops north to defend the border against potential American aggression. Instead, he marches them south and seizes the government. This is the dysfunction that will doom Mexico. When your armies fight your own government instead of external threats, you cannot win foreign wars. Meanwhile, Mexico's far-flung territories remain desperately underdeveloped. Texas, California, New Mexico, these aren't thriving provinces with schools and infrastructure and bustling towns. They're barely governed. A few scattered missions, some ranches, vast empty spaces that Mexico City claims but cannot actually control. Nature abhors a vacuum. So do empires. North of the border, something remarkable is happening. The United States population explodes. 2 million people in 1780. 12 million by 1830. A 6-fold increase in just 50 years. They need somewhere to go. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubles American territory overnight. Thomas Jefferson buys it from Napoleon for $15 million, roughly 4 cents per acre. Suddenly, America owns everything from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. And the people come. Families pack wagons and head west. They clear forests, plant crops, build towns in what were recently indigenous territories. The native peoples, Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, are pushed aside, often violently. 1830, President Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act. 16,000 Cherokee are forced to march west in what becomes known as the Trail of Tears. 4,000 die along the way. America is expanding, and it's not stopping at existing borders. The economics tell the story as clearly as the maps. By the 1840s, The United States is industrializing rapidly. Factories in New England, steel mills in Pennsylvania, cotton gins transforming southern agriculture, railroads beginning to spread, the telegraph about to revolutionize communication. Mexico remains overwhelmingly agricultural. Few factories, limited industrial capacity, an economy still structured around the hacienda system, huge estates worked by poor laborers, controlled by wealthy families who care more about maintaining their power than modernizing the economy. When war comes, this economic gap will matter as much as any battle. Geography favors the Americans too. The Mississippi River and its tributaries create a natural highway running through the heart of America. Troops and supplies can move by boat. Fast, from dick to, cheap, efficient. The US Navy controls the Gulf of Mexico, meaning American forces can be supplied by sea along the coast. Mexico has no equivalent. To move armies from central Mexico to the northern frontier means marching on foot through harsh, often desert terrain. No major rivers run north-south. No easy supply routes. Just heat, dust, and distance. An army might lose a quarter of its strength to desertion and disease before even reaching the battlefield. But the real powder keg is Texas. In 1821, the same year, Mexico wins independence. The Mexican government makes a fateful decision. They invite American settlers into Texas. The logic seems sound at the time. Texas is desperately underpopulated. Comanche raids terrorize the few Mexican settlers there. Maybe, Mexican officials think, American colonists will help develop the region and provide a buffer against indigenous attacks. The conditions are clear. Settlers must become Mexican citizens. They must convert to Roman Catholicism. They cannot bring slaves. Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. The first American arrivals often respect these terms. Stephen F. Austin's colony integrates reasonably well. People learn Spanish. Some genuinely convert. They follow Mexican law. The rest is... But later waves? They ignore almost everything. They don't become Mexican citizens in any meaningful sense. They don't convert to Catholicism. Many bring slaves anyway, calling them indentured servants to skirt the law. They refuse to register firearms as Mexican law requires. And they keep coming. By 1835, somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 Americans live in Texas. They vastly outnumber the roughly 5,000 Mexican residents. The American settlers call the region Texas. The Mexicans call it Coahuila y Tejas. They can't even agree on the name. Mexican officials watch this demographic shift with growing alarm. "We have invited a wolf into our home," one observer warns. "Soon it will devour us." He's right. 1834. Antonio López de Santa Anna becomes president of Mexico. A centralist, he immediately moves to consolidate power in Mexico City and crack down on federalist tendencies in the outer provinces. This is exactly what the American settlers in Texas have been waiting for. An excuse. "We're not rebelling against Mexico," they'll claim. "We're defending federalism against Santa Anna's tyranny." It's a convenient fiction. The truth is simpler. They never intended to be Mexicans. They're Americans who happen to live south of a border they don't recognize. And they're about to fight for independence. 1835. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna has a problem in the north. The American settlers in Texas are openly defying Mexican authority. They're ignoring tax collectors. They're holding unauthorized political meetings. Some are drilling militia companies. Santa Anna, who has just consolidated power as a centralist dictator, will not tolerate this challenge. He decides to march north personally with an army, not to negotiate, to crush the rebellion before it spreads. But Santa Anna has badly miscalculated. Instead of intimidating the Texan settlers into submission, his military mobilization pushes them into open revolt. Texan militias under Sam Houston begin seizing Mexican towns and garrisons. What started as resistance hardens into revolution. Santa Anna responds by mobilizing reinforcements. He'll teach these ungrateful Americans a lesson they'll never forget. February 1836. Santa Anna arrives outside San Antonio with roughly 2,800 troops. His target, a fortified former mission called the Alamo. Inside, fewer than 200 defenders wait. Among them are men whose names will become legend. Davy Crockett, former congressman from Tennessee, frontiersman, already famous across America. Jim Bowie, knife fighter, land speculator, already sick with what's probably typhoid or pneumonia. William Barrett Travis, young, ambitious, now in command despite being just 26 years old. They know they're outnumbered. Travis sends desperate letters begging for reinforcements. "I shall never surrender or retreat," he writes. Victory or death. Reinforcements don't come. Santa Anna raises a red flag over San Antonio. The message is clear. No quarter. Surrender now or die. The defenders refuse. For 12 days, Mexican artillery pounds the Alamo's walls. The defenders fire back with their own cannons, but they're running low on ammunition, low on food, low on hope. March 6th, 5:30 in the morning. Still dark. Santa Anna orders the final assault. Mexican columns advance from 4 directions. The defenders wake to the sound of bugles and drums and the Mexican battle cry, "Viva Santa Anna!" The first wave hits the north wall. Texan rifles cut them down. Men fall, others climb over the bodies and keep coming. Travis appears on the wall, fires his shotgun, takes a bullet through the forehead. He's one of the first to die. The Mexican troops regroup and charge again. This time, they bring ladders. They scale the walls from multiple points. Too many to stop. Once the Mexicans breach the walls, it becomes a slaughter. Hand-to-hand fighting in the plaza, in the barracks, in the church, bayonets and rifle butts and knives. The defenders sell their lives dearly, but they're overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Davy Crockett's death remains disputed. Some accounts say he died fighting. Others claim he surrendered and was executed on Santa Anna's orders. We'll never know for certain. Jim Bowie, too sick to stand, dies in his bed, either killed in his cot or dragged out and executed. By 8 o'clock that morning, every defender is dead. All of them. Mexican casualties, somewhere between 400 and 600 killed or wounded. Santa Anna has won, but at terrible cost. And he's made a catastrophic political mistake. News of the Alamo massacre spreads across Texas like wildfire. "Remember the Alamo" becomes the cry. Texans who might have negotiated now want blood. Volunteers flood into Sam Houston's army. But Santa Anna isn't finished teaching lessons. March 27th, 3 weeks after the Alamo. Goliad. Colonel James Fannin has surrendered his force of about 350 Texans to Mexican General José de Urrea. They're promised they'll be treated as prisoners of war. Santa Anna has other ideas. He sends orders. Execute them all. On Palm Sunday, Mexican troops march the prisoners out in 3 columns. The Texans think they're being moved to another location. When they're well away from the fort, the Mexican soldiers turn and fire. 342 Texans are killed. Some are bayoneted. Some are clubbed to death. A few escape by playing dead and crawling away after dark. The Goliad massacre galvanizes Texas even more than the Alamo. Now the cry is, "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" Santa Anna has created martyrs. And martyrs are dangerous. While the massacres at the Alamo and Goliad are happening, something else occurs that will seal Mexico's fate. March 2nd, 1836, 4 days before the Alamo falls, Texas declares itself an independent republic. Not a province seeking greater autonomy within Mexico. Not rebels negotiating for federalist reforms. An entirely separate nation. The Republic of Texas. Now, Santa Anna's mission changes. He's not just suppressing a rebellion anymore. He's fighting a war of independence. And he needs to win it quickly before international recognition makes Texas independence permanent. His army advances eastward, pursuing Sam Houston's forces. Houston keeps retreating, refusing to give battle. His army grows as volunteers arrive, but they're poorly trained and undisciplined. He needs more time. Santa Anna grows overconfident. The Texans are running. He's won every engagement. Final victory seems inevitable. This confidence will destroy him. April 21st, 1836. San Jacinto. Santa Anna has made camp near the San Jacinto River with roughly 1,300 men. He's expecting reinforcements led by General Kos. They arrive early that morning, about 540 exhausted troops who've been marching all night. Santa Anna decides his men need rest. He doesn't bother posting adequate sentries. After all, the Texans have been running for weeks. Why would they attack now? 3:30 that afternoon. Sam Houston has roughly 900 men formed in battle line. They advance quietly through tall grass toward the Mexican camp. A single cannon fires, the opening shot. Then the Texans charge. Remember the Alamo. Remember Goliad. The Mexican camp erupts in chaos. Men scramble for weapons. Some are sleeping. Others are cooking. None are ready for battle. The Texan assault is ferocious. They've been waiting for this moment since the Alamo. This isn't just a battle. It's revenge. Mexican soldiers try to form lines, but the Texans are already among them. Rifle fire at point-blank range. Bayonets. Rifle butts. Knives. Many Mexicans try to surrender. Me no Alamo. Me no Goliad, they shout, trying to distinguish themselves from the troops who committed the massacres. Some Texans show mercy. Others don't. The killing continues, even as men throw down their weapons. The battle lasts 18 minutes. Mexican casualties: 630 killed, 208 wounded, 730 captured. Nearly 2/3 of Santa Anna's army is gone. Texan casualties: 9 killed, 30 wounded. But the real prize comes the next day. Santa Anna fled the battlefield in the chaos. He changed into common soldier's clothing, hoping to escape unrecognized. April 22nd. Texan scouts capture a Mexican soldier hiding in tall grass. They're about to let him go. Just another prisoner, when other Mexican captives see him. El Presidente, they shout. The Texans have captured Santa Anna himself. Sam Houston, wounded in the ankle during the battle, lies under a tree when they bring Santa Anna to him. The Mexican general expects to be executed immediately. Some Texans certainly want to hang him on the spot. But Houston sees a better use for his prisoner. May 14th, 1836. Under extreme duress, with a rope around his neck, essentially, Santa Anna signs the treaties of Velasco. He recognizes the Republic of Texas. He agrees that the Texas border is the Rio Grande. He orders all Mexican troops to withdraw south of that river. In exchange, then he gets to keep breathing. Houston releases him. Santa Anna returns to Mexico in disgrace and immediately renounces the treaty. I signed under duress, he declares. A document signed with a gun to your head has no legal standing. He's not wrong, legally speaking. Mexico never recognizes Texas independence. As far as Mexico City is concerned, Texas is still a rebellious province. But Santa Anna's political career is temporarily over. He's exiled, humiliated, blamed for the disaster. He'll spend the next few years in Cuba, plotting his return. And he will return. Multiple times. Santa Anna is nothing if not resilient. Texas, meanwhile, exists in a strange limbo. It's independent in practice. It has its own government, its own army, its own flag. The United States recognizes it. So does Britain and France. But Mexico does not. And Mexico is right next door, angry and much larger. The Republic of Texas is vulnerable. It knows it. And it starts looking for a bigger ally. The Republic of Texas has a border problem. Texas claims its southern boundary is the Rio Grande. Mexico insists it's the Nueces River, roughly 150 kilometers further north. That disputed strip between the two rivers, about 35,000 square kilometers of scrubland, desert and scattered settlements. Both sides claim it. Neither can truly control it. And into this power vacuum ride the Comanche. The Comanche are among the most formidable mounted warriors on the continent. Masters of guerrilla warfare and lightning raids. For decades they've terrorized Spanish, then Mexican settlements in northern Mexico. Now, with Mexican authority weakened by the Texas Revolution, the raids intensify. 1844. Sam Houston, now president of Texas, makes a pragmatic decision. He negotiates peace with the Comanche. The result is predictable. Comanche raids into Texas decrease sharply. Raids into Mexico explode. Mexican officials watch with fury as Comanche war parties sweep south, steal hundreds of horses and cattle, then drive them back north into Texas territory. There, American and Texan traders buy the stolen livestock. No questions asked. In exchange, they sell the Comanche guns and ammunition. Mexico accuses Texas of deliberately facilitating the raids, using indigenous warriors as proxies to bleed Mexico. Texas denies it, of course. But the denial rings hollow when stolen Mexican horses show up at markets in San Antonio and Houston. The Comanche situation is just one of many problems facing the struggling republic. Texas is broke. The War of Independence drained what little treasury existed. The republic prints its own currency, but nobody trusts it. Texas bonds trade at a fraction of face value. The government can barely pay its soldiers or officials. Worse, Mexico refuses to accept that Texas is actually independent. Mexican President Antonio López de Santa Anna. Yes, he's back in power again despite San Jacinto. Threatens, repeatedly, to reconquer Texas. The treaty I signed was extracted under duress, he declares. It has no legal validity. Texas is Mexican territory and will be Mexican territory again. Texas knows it cannot defend itself against a full Mexican invasion. The Republic's population is only about 50,000, roughly 1/10 of what it is today. Against Mexico's military potential, Texas doesn't stand a chance alone. So, Texas looks north, to the United States. The question of American annexation divides the United States as deeply as anything since the Constitution was written. The Democratic Party generally supports it. Texas is enormous. Rich agricultural land. Cotton plantations already producing wealth. Democrats see manifest destiny. America's supposed God-given right to expand across the continent. The Whig Party opposes annexation, especially the Northern Whigs. And their opposition has nothing to do with Mexico and everything to do with slavery. Because Texas is a slave state. When American settlers brought their slaves to Texas in the 1820s and 30s, then they ignored Mexican law banning slavery. When Texas became independent, slavery was written right into the new republic's constitution. By the 1840s, enslaved people make up about 30% of Texas's population. Northern Whigs see exactly what annexation means. One massive new slave state enters the Union. That means 2 more pro-slavery senators in Washington, more representatives in the House voting to protect slavery. The delicate balance between free and slave states, maintained through decades of increasingly strained compromises, collapses. Abolitionist Congressman Joshua Giddings of Ohio speaks for many Northern Whigs. I will not participate in extending the institution of slavery. Texas annexation is nothing but a slaveholders' plot to increase their power in Congress. Southern politicians don't even bother denying it. Senator Robert Walker of Mississippi argues openly that the South needs Texas to maintain political equilibrium. Without expansion, he warns, the slave states will be politically strangled. The slavery question makes annexation politically toxic. Multiple presidents avoid it entirely. Then comes James K. Polk. March 1845. Polk is inaugurated as the 11th President of the United States. He's a Democrat from Tennessee, a slaveholder himself, and an ardent expansionist. Publicly, Polk talks about securing America's borders and protecting American settlers. Privately, his ambitions stretch much further. He wants Texas. He wants Oregon. He wants California. He wants New Mexico. He wants America to stretch from Atlantic to Pacific. Polk moves fast. He pushes annexation through Congress using a joint resolution, which requires only a simple majority in both houses, not the 2/3 majority a treaty would need. It's a political maneuver that bypasses Whig opposition. The resolution passes. Barely. December 29th, 1845. Texas officially becomes the 28th state. In Mexico City, the reaction is immediate and furious. The Mexican government recalls its ambassador from Washington. President José Joaquín de Herrera declares that annexation is an act of aggression. Mexico will never accept the loss of Texas, he announces. We are prepared to go to war to recover our territory. It's not an idle threat. But Herrera's own government is collapsing around him. General Mariano Paredes. Remember him? The general who marched south instead of north. Stages a coup in December 1845 and seizes power. Paredes is even more hardline than Herrera. He publicly vows to reconquer Texas. His government officially declares war is inevitable. Polk hears these threats and decides to demonstrate American resolve. He orders General Zachary Taylor to move American troops from their camp at Corpus Christi safely north of the disputed territory, down to the Rio Grande. This is a deliberately provocative move. If Mexico claims the border is the Nueces River, then Taylor's march takes American troops deep into Mexican territory. It's an invasion, or at least Mexico can claim it is. Taylor has about 4,000 troops, roughly half the entire United States Army. They're called Old Rough and Ready's men after Taylor's nickname. February 1846. They march south. The Mexican commander in the region, General Pedro de Ampudia, watches the Americans approach. He sends Taylor a message demanding the Americans withdraw to the Nueces. Taylor refuses. He establishes Fort Texas on the north bank of the Rio Grande, directly across from the Mexican town of Matamoros. American cannons point at Mexican buildings. Mexican cannons point back. For weeks, the two armies stare at each other across the river. Soldiers on both sides can see each other. Sometimes they shout insults. Sometimes they just watch and wait. Tension builds daily. Taylor knows he's vulnerable. He's deep in disputed territory, with supply lines stretching back hundreds of kilometers. If the Mexicans cut those supply lines, his army starves. He orders a detachment of dragoons, mounted infantry, to patrol the area and watch for Mexican troop movements. April 25th, 1846. Captain Seth Thornton leads 63 dragoons on patrol north of the Rio Grande. They ride to a ranch in the disputed zone to investigate reports of Mexican soldiers in the area. It's an ambush. Mexican cavalry, roughly 2,000 of them, surround the Americans. Thornton's men try to fight their way out, but they're hopelessly outnumbered. 11 Americans are killed. 6 are wounded. The rest, including Thornton, are captured. The disputed border has drawn first blood. Taylor sends an urgent dispatch to Washington. Hostilities may now be considered as commenced, he writes. The message takes almost 2 weeks to reach President Polk. May 9th, 1846. Polk receives Taylor's report. He's been waiting for something like this. An incident he can use. A casus belli. May 11th. Polk addresses Congress. The cup of forbearance had been exhausted even before the recent information from the frontier of the Rio Grande, he declares. But now, after reiterated menaces, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. American soil. That phrase will be disputed for the next 175 years. Was it American soil or Mexican soil that America claimed? The ambush happened in the disputed territory. Land both sides claimed. Polk presents it as if Mexico invaded undisputed American territory. It's a distortion at best, an outright lie at worst. Congressman Abraham Lincoln rises in the House. He demands Polk show him the exact spot where American blood was shed on American soil. Polk ignores the question. But Congress votes for war anyway. May 13th, 1846. The United States declares war on Mexico. The vote is 173 to 14 in the House, 40 to 2 in the Senate. Overwhelming support, at least on paper. But many congressmen feel trapped. Polk has bundled the declaration of war with funding for troops already in the field. To vote against the war means voting against supplying American soldiers facing a Mexican army. It's political blackmail. The United States is going to war. And most Americans have no idea what they're getting into. General Zachary Taylor doesn't look like a hero. A German immigrant soldier in an Illinois regiment describes him with brutal honesty. Taylor is short and very heavy, with pronounced face lines and grey hair. Wears an old oilcloth cap, a dusty green coat, a frightful pair of trousers. On horseback looks like a toad. But the men love him. Old Rough and Ready, they call him. He dresses casually, eats with the enlisted men, then shares their hardships. In an army where most officers come from wealthy families and treat soldiers like servants, Taylor is different. He's professional, competent, and genuinely cares whether his men live or die. That German immigrant, his name is Frederick Zare, has no such warm feelings about America itself. Love for my new homeland was definitely not the reason I became a soldier, Zay writes in his diary. My 6 to 7 month stay in the United States certainly instilled no patriotism in me. When natives felt well disposed towards us Germans, they thought it flattering to call us sauerkraut. Usually they labelled us the goddamn Dutch. He pauses, then adds, this asinine rebuff considerably dampened my ardour for becoming a soldier. So why did he join? The same reason thousands of other immigrants joined. Money. In 1846, the United States Army is tiny. Only about 7,500 regular troops total, plus state militias of variable quality. Compare that to Mexico's 40,000 troops, and the problem becomes obvious. America is drastically outnumbered. The army is small because most Americans don't want a military career. Limited promotion opportunities. Poor pay. Harsh conditions. Why become a soldier when you can claim free land out west or work in a factory? so the army fills its ranks with those who have few other options. 47% of regular troops are immigrants, mostly Irish and Germans. Men who came to America seeking opportunity and found discrimination instead. Men who joined the army not from patriotism, but from desperation. The promise of regular pay, food, and accommodation appeals to those with empty pockets. $7 a month. Not much, but better than starving. Still, the American army has significant advantages. Most US troops carry flintlock muzzleloaders. Some have newer percussion cap muskets, more reliable in wet weather, faster to fire. But the real American advantage is artillery. Samuel Ringgold has revolutionized American tactics with flying artillery. Instead of stationary cannons, Ringgold's batteries are mobile, horse-drawn guns that can gallop forward, unlimber, fire, and retreat before the enemy can respond. It's a new way of warfare. Artillery that moves with the infantry instead of sitting in fixed positions. Mexican commanders have never seen anything like it. The Americans also have excellent engineers and surveyors. Men who can scout terrain, find routes through impossible country, build fortifications quickly. This expertise will prove crucial in the battles ahead. And there's the economic disparity. America's Industrial Revolution is well underway. Factories in New England produce weapons and ammunition. The railroad network, still limited but growing, can move supplies faster than wagons. The Mississippi River and its tributaries create natural supply routes into the interior. Mexico has almost none of this infrastructure. Few factories. No significant railroad network. An economy still based primarily on agriculture and mining. When the shooting starts, America can manufacture and transport what it needs. Mexico struggles to supply armies in the field. But American advantages in technology and economics don't mean American leadership is competent. Some commanders have experience fighting indigenous tribes on the frontier. But few have fought a large standing army in conventional warfare. And some officers are appointed for purely political reasons. Rewards for loyalty rather than military skill. One soldier complains bitterly about General Gideon Pillow, a Polk political ally. Pillow is about as consummate an ass as any army, modern or ancient, has ever been inflicted with. Harsh words. But in the coming battles, Pillow will prove them accurate. Geography also favors the Americans. US forces can move troops and supplies via the Mississippi River. The Navy controls the Gulf of Mexico, allowing coastal operations and blockades. American supply lines, while long, benefit from waterways and superior logistics. Mexican armies must march on foot through harsh terrain. Desert, mountains, scrubland. No major rivers run conveniently north-south. Supply wagons break down on rough roads. Soldiers desert because they're not being paid or fed. And then there's the volunteer problem. Congress authorizes raising 50,000 volunteers to supplement the regular army. On paper, this solves the numerical disadvantage. In practice, it creates a disaster. Many volunteers arrive unarmed. The government must outfit them from limited stocks. They're rushed to the front with minimal training. Some drill for only a few weeks before facing combat. Worse, they elect their own officers. This sounds democratic. In reality, it means popularity contests. The man who buys the most drinks or gives the best speeches becomes captain or colonel, regardless of whether he knows anything about military tactics. A regular army officer watches volunteer units arrive and despairs. They plunder the poor inhabitants of everything they can lay their hands on and shoot them when they remonstrate. This is the true picture, and the cause is the utter incapacity of their officers to control them or command respect. There are also class tensions between regulars and volunteers. Regular army soldiers come mostly from lower social classes. Working men, immigrants, those with few options. They're better trained and more disciplined because they've been in the army for years. Volunteers often come from higher social status. Shop owners, clerks, farmers with property. They look down on regulars as lower class while knowing nothing about soldiering. The regulars resent being ordered around by incompetent volunteer officers. The volunteers resent the regulars' professional disdain. The friction weakens unit cohesion. Some volunteers struggle terribly with military life. They enlisted expecting adventure and glory. Instead, they get camp chores, harsh discipline, and endless boredom. Many are homesick within weeks. They regret volunteering but cannot leave without being branded deserters. An Illinois soldier reflects on how drinking helps him cope. It always was against my principle to drink when I was home. Although I have altered my notion now, for it is a great help to a man's health and also to drown trouble. For when a man is about half drunk, there is nothing on his mind, only good things. He imagines every button on his coat is gold. Alcohol abuse becomes rampant in American camps. 361 US soldiers will die in camp accidents throughout the war. Many of those deaths are caused by drunkenness and poor discipline. But alcohol isn't the biggest killer. Diseases. General Taylor pays little attention to sanitation in his camps. Latrines are poorly maintained or non-existent. Water sources become contaminated. Typhus, cholera, and dysentery sweep through the ranks. Volunteers are especially vulnerable. City boys who've never been exposed to frontier diseases. Farmers from isolated communities with no immunity to cholera. They sicken and die in shocking numbers. One observer writes, "I have seen more suffering since I came out here than I could have imagined to exist. It is really awful." I allude to the sufferings of the volunteers. They literally die like dogs. Die like dogs. In camps. Far from battle. From preventable diseases that proper sanitation could reduce. Desertion rates approach 10% in some units. Volunteers simply walk away in the night. Some fear missing out on employment opportunities back home. Others cannot handle the reality of military life. Still others conclude the war is unjust and refuse to participate further. Officers struggle to prevent desertion. Harsh punishments, flogging, branding, execution, don't deter desperate men. Not all volunteers perform poorly, though. Frontiersmen from Tennessee and Kentucky are skilled scouts and sharpshooters. They know how to live off the land, track enemies, fight in irregular terrain. These men prove invaluable. Mormon volunteers from close-knit communities show excellent discipline. Their strong religious bonds translate into unit cohesion. They follow orders, support each other, don't desert. But overall, the volunteer system is deeply flawed. It produces unpredictable quality, some excellent units, many mediocre or terrible ones. This is the American army preparing to invade Mexico. Technologically superior in artillery and logistics. Economically stronger. Better supplied. But with undertrained volunteers, political appointee officers, and massive discipline problems. They're about to face an enemy that outnumbers them significantly. The question is whether American advantages in technology and economics can overcome Mexican advantages in numbers and defensive position. The answer will come soon. At a place called Palo Alto. The Mexican infantry carries weapons that should have been scrapped decades ago. Mostly British muskets. India pattern flintlocks. Discarded surplus from the Peninsular War fought between 1808 and 1814. By 1846, these guns are 30 to 40 years old. Jonathan Ferguson, keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the United Kingdom, can explain exactly why this matters. The India pattern musket, Ferguson explains, is a simplified design of the already quite old Brown Bess flintlock. The basic design goes back to 1730, but the India pattern specifically comes in around 1797. 3 million were made during the Napoleonic Wars, so there'll be a lot floating around available to other countries. Mexico bought them cheap. Surplus weapons nobody else wanted. By 1846, Ferguson continues, these things would have been physically worn out depending on how much use they'd seen. I've been told that at least one musket had the barrel held in with a leather thong. If it's got that problem going on, I dread to think what's happening ignition-wise. The ignition system is where everything falls apart. A flintlock works through a simple but precise mechanism. You pull the trigger. A spring-loaded hammer holding a piece of flint strikes a steel plate. This creates sparks that fall into a pan containing a small amount of gunpowder. The powder in the pan ignites. The flash in the pan. The flash in the pan. That flash travels through a small hole, the touch hole, we toe side, into the main barrel where it ignites the main powder charge and fires the ball. When everything works perfectly, it's reliable. When things go wrong, you get a flash in the pan and nothing else. Black powder burns very dirtily, Ferguson explains. Tons of carbon is left behind when it burns. That will coat the pan. It goes everywhere. Coats you. The ball will start to constrict and make loading more difficult. Normally, the ball is smaller than the barrel, 75 caliber barrel than 69 caliber ball, to allow for this fouling. The paper cartridge wrapping the ball acts as a sabot that keeps it accurate enough for about 100 yards while giving enough windage so fouling isn't a big problem. But Mexican soldiers face compounding issues. Their powder is low quality, burns even dirtier than normal black powder, leaves more residue. To compensate for the weak powder, they overcharge, put in extra powder hoping for more power. This makes the fouling exponentially worse. Now, the barrel constricts faster, velocity drops, accuracy degrades, and the touch hole clogs. The touch hole will narrow as it gets caked up with fouling, Ferguson notes. If you were in a sustained firefight, you would get a pricker. Sharp, pointy thing. Sharp, pointy thing. Jam it in there and remove some of the fouling. That will unblock the hole and you can carry on shooting. Do Mexican soldiers have prickers? Do they have training to use them? Probably not. I don't know if these guys have the training, the knowledge to do that, Ferguson says. I don't know if they had access to a pricker or a suitable improvised tool. If you don't, you're just going to be flashing in the pan for the rest of the battle, and no bullets are going to be coming out. Ferguson demonstrates with a 200-year-old working musket from the Royal Armoury's collection. We occasionally shoot this thing, he says. We've never had a misfire with it. We've put a handful of shots through it every couple of years. Never has it failed us unless the flint broke when it came to the end of its natural life. But that's with proper maintenance. The flints have a limited lifespan, Ferguson explains. Routinely, they would have been swapped out. You've got to install this flint at the right angle. It's got to be made in a precise, consistent way so that all the geometry works, so it strikes at the right point here, scrapes down without breaking, without excessively wearing, and creates enough sparks to set the thing off. It sounds simple. Just stick a piece of stone in the hammer and pull the trigger. No, Ferguson insists. It's extremely precise to work consistently, reliably over a period of years. If you don't have that logistical setup, that training, that doctrine, that culture, you've got guys who haven't even shot a gun before. That's going to cause you serious problems. So, nothing is inherently wrong with the India pattern musket design. In good condition, with proper training and maintenance, it's a sound weapon. But Mexico in 1846 lacks the logistics, the training infrastructure, the flint replacement system, and the maintenance culture to keep these 30-year-old guns functioning. The result is Mexican muskets failing at the worst possible moments. Mexican artillery isn't much better. Mostly older Spanish cannons based on Napoleonic Gribeauval carriages. The ammunition is low quality. And here's the real problem. Mexican artillery barely trains. An officer reports. The cavalry was drilled only in regiments. The artillery hardly ever manoeuvred and never fired a blank shot. The general in command was never present on the field of maneuvers, so he was unable to appreciate the respective qualities of the various bodies under his command. Never fired a blank shot, meaning Mexican artillerymen go into battle having never actually practiced firing their guns. The cavalry, at least, consists of highly skilled horsemen. Mexican lancers are superb riders with excellent individual skills, but they lack coordination with infantry and artillery. No combined arms training. Each branch fights independently instead of supporting each other. And then there are the soldaderas, the women who followed the armies. An American reporter watching a Mexican army on the march describes them: the woman of 60 or more years, the mother with her infant wrapped in her rebozo, the wife, the youthful señorita frisking, along with her lover with sombrero upon her head, even the prattling girl who'd followed padre and madre to the wars. Entire families march with the army. Grandmothers, mothers, daughters, children. They're called soldaderas, the soldier women. They're not just following their men. They're keeping the army functional. Mexican officers have tried repeatedly to limit female camp followers. They want to modernize logistics like European armies. Official commissaries, quartermaster corps, professional supply systems. But they never develop a viable alternative. The soldaderas function as foragers, cooks, nurses, and laundresses. They find food where none exists. They turn meager supplies into meals. They tend the wounded without medical training. They maintain hygiene in camps. Most importantly, they prevent desertion. Mexican soldiers receive irregular pay. Sometimes they're not paid for months. Without the women, men would simply walk away. Why stay with an army that doesn't feed you or pay you? But if your wife and children are with you, you can't easily desert. Your family depends on the army's rations, meager as they are. The soldaderas tie men to their units through family bonds. Mexican officers recognize this begrudgingly. They complain about women in camps. They issue orders restricting them. Then they ignore their own orders because they know the army would collapse without these women. The soldaderas also face terrible dangers. They're in battle zones, caught in artillery fire, killed in camp attacks. After the Battle of Cerro Gordo, an American trooper will recall, the most distressing of all was the sight of hundreds of dead soldaderas scattered among the bodies of their men. Women die alongside soldiers, but history rarely mentions them. No monuments to soldaderas. Their names forgotten. Their sacrifices unrecorded. Yet without them, Mexican resistance would have collapsed much earlier. The dependence on soldaderas reveals Mexico's fundamental logistical failure. No nation should need unpaid women's labor to keep its military functioning. But Mexico has no choice. It's one more way Mexico cannot match American advantages. Soldiering was traditionally a noble profession in Mexico. Strong unit identities, pride in military service. But by 1846, the military has suffered from decades of revolts and political purges. Talented officers are removed for political reasons. Some commanders are unreliable, more loyal to political factions than to Mexico itself. Remember General Mariano Paredes? Ordered to move his troops north to defend the border in December 1845. Instead, he marched them south and seized the government. That's the level of dysfunction. Generals using armies for coups instead of defense. The need to keep troops available for internal political threats limits mobilization against external enemies. You can't send your entire army north to fight Americans if you need half of it to prevent a coup in Mexico City. Equipment shortages plague every level. Not enough muskets. Not enough ammunition. Not enough uniforms. Not enough shoes. Mexican soldiers often march barefoot. They arrive at battle exhausted, hungry, demoralized. And geography works against them. American forces move via the Mississippi River and the Gulf Coast. Mexican armies march on foot through deserts. No equivalent river system. No easy supply routes. An army might lose 25% of its strength to disease and desertion before even reaching the battlefield. That's not cowardice. That's impossible logistics. Yet, despite all these problems, outdated weapons, failed logistics, political dysfunction, Mexican soldiers will fight with remarkable courage. They'll stand against American artillery that tears their formations apart. They'll charge American positions knowing they're outnumbered. They'll defend their homeland against an invasion they cannot stop. The Mexican army's failures are not failures of courage. They're failures of leadership, logistics, economics, and political will. And now they're about to face Zachary Taylor's army on open ground. May 1st, 1846. General Zachary Taylor has a problem. He's established Fort Texas on the Rio Grande, directly across from the Mexican town of Matamoros. But his supply depot is at Point Isabel, then about 30 kilometers away on the coast. That depot contains all his ammunition, food, and equipment. And there are reports that Mexican forces are moving to cut him off. Taylor makes a decision. He'll march the bulk of his army, about 2,200 men, to Point Isabel to secure the supplies. He leaves a garrison of about 500 at Fort Texas to hold the position. It's a calculated risk. If the Mexicans attack the fort while he's gone, the garrison might not hold. But without supplies, his entire army starves. Taylor reaches Point Isabel without incident. He fortifies the position and loads wagons with supplies. Then he hears the sound he's been dreading. Cannon fire from the direction of Fort Texas. The Mexicans are bombarding his garrison. For 6 days, Mexican artillery pounds Fort Texas. The garrison returns fire, but they're outnumbered. 2 American soldiers are killed. including Major Jacob Brown, for whom the fort will later be renamed Brownsville. Taylor prepares to march back with supplies. He knows the Mexicans will try to intercept him. The question is where? May 8th. Taylor's column is returning to Fort Texas. Wagons laden with supplies. 2,200 troops in column. At a place called Palo Alto, tall timber, many using, they find the Mexican army waiting. FT men. General Mariano Arista has positioned about 4,400 troops across the road. He outnumbers Taylor 2-1. The smart tactical move would be an aggressive attack, overwhelming the Americans with superior numbers before they can deploy. Instead, Arista stays defensive. Fatal mistake. The battle becomes an artillery duel. And American artillery is far superior. The older Mexican cannons fire solid shot, iron balls. At long range, many fall short. American soldiers watch cannonballs rolling toward them across the flat ground. Some men simply step aside and let them pass. Others jump over them like children playing a game. It would be amusing if men weren't dying. Meanwhile, Samuel Ringgold's flying artillery demonstrates its revolutionary power. Horse-drawn guns gallop forward. Unlimber. Fire. Limber up again. Retreat before Mexican guns can find the range. Move to a new position. Repeat. The Mexicans have never seen anything like it. Artillery that refuses to stay in one place. Guns that appear, fire, and vanish. American gunners are also better trained. They've actually practiced firing their weapons. Unlike their Mexican counterparts, they know how to estimate range, adjust for wind, reload quickly. The Mexican lines take a battering. Solid shot tears through formations, and men fall in rows. Officers try to maintain order, but the artillery fire is relentless. At one point, the dry grass catches fire. Smoke drifts across the battlefield, obscuring vision. Both sides keep firing into the smoke, hoping to hit something. When the smoke clears, the Mexican army is still there, battered but intact. As evening approaches, Arista withdraws. His troops have had enough. They've stood under artillery fire for hours without being able to effectively respond. Casualties tell the story. Mexico, 100 killed, 120 wounded. United States, 9 killed, 44 wounded. Among the American wounded is Major Samuel Ringgold himself. A cannonball smashes through his thighs. He dies 3 days later. The pioneer of flying artillery, killed by artillery. The bitter irony is not lost on anyone. But the battle proves American technological superiority. Better guns, better tactics, better training. Arista knows he cannot win an artillery duel. So he retreats to a position where American cannons will be less effective. Resaca de la Palma, a dried-up tributary of the Rio Grande. The ravine is about 1.2 meters deep, not huge, but enough to provide cover. The surrounding area is covered in chaparral, dense scrubland with thorny shrubs. Brigadier General Romulo Diaz de la Vega is confident. "If I had with me $100,000 in silver," he says, "I would have bet the whole of it that no 10,000 men on earth could drive us from our position." Strong words. And the position is genuinely formidable. But there are problems. Mexican troops are exhausted from yesterday's battle. They're hungry. Supplies haven't caught up. Morale is shaky after taking such heavy casualties at Palo Alto. And the dense chaparral that provides concealment also limits artillery effectiveness. Mexican guns cannot traverse easily through the thick brush. Neither can American guns, but this actually helps the Americans. It negates the Mexican defensive advantage and turns the battle into close-quarters infantry combat. May 9th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Taylor's army arrives. Mexican artillery on the road forces back an American light infantry vanguard. American artillery responds with grapeshot, clusters of small iron balls that spread like a shotgun blast. The grapeshot prevents a Mexican cavalry charge from developing. Then American troops plunge into the chaparral. This is the kind of fighting that favors small units led by aggressive junior officers. Not grand battlefield maneuvers, but squad-level combat in dense brush where you can barely see 10 meters ahead. Ulysses S. Grant, then a regimental quartermaster, finds himself in action. "The balls commenced to whistle very thick overhead," he later writes, cutting the limbs of the chaparral right and left. "We could not see the enemy, so I ordered the men to lie down." An order that did not have to be enforced. Grant is learning war. The future Union commander getting his first taste of combat in Mexican scrubland. A group of US infantry works around the Mexican left flank through the dense brush. They emerge behind Mexican positions. Suddenly, they're capturing guns and approaching General Arista's headquarters tent. The Mexican left collapses. American dragoons, mounted infantry, charge straight through the center of the Mexican line. They capture General Diaz de la Vega himself. The man who bet $100,000 that his position couldn't be taken is now a prisoner. But the dragoons cannot hold the captured artillery alone. Mexican troops counterattack. American infantry rushes up to support. Now it's hand-to-hand fighting for the guns, bayonets and musket butts. Men grappling in the dust. Brutal, close, personal. General Arista attempts a last-ditch cavalry charge to break the American attack. American troops repel it with disciplined fire. Volley after volley cuts down the charging horsemen. The Mexican army breaks. Soldiers flee toward the Rio Grande. Some try to swim across. Many drown in the attempt, dragged under by their equipment and uniforms. Others throw down their weapons and surrender. The rout becomes a massacre. Mexican casualties: 154 killed, 205 wounded, 156 missing. About 15% of the force. American casualties: 49 killed, 83 wounded. About 9%. This is the first major infantry battle of the war, and it's a decisive American victory. The next day, Taylor crosses the Rio Grande. Matamoros is abandoned. The Mexican army has fled south. American troops occupy the town without firing a shot. The United States Army is now on Mexican soil. And the war is just beginning. President James K. Polk has been lying to the American people. Publicly, he talks about defending Texas and securing the border, protecting American settlers from Mexican aggression, standing firm for American honor. Privately, he wants California. Alta California, Upper California, is a vast, sparsely populated Mexican territory stretching along the Pacific coast. About 5,000 non-indigenous people live there. 4,000 of Mexican descent, 400 Americans, mostly scattered among religious missions and a few coastal towns. Mexican settlement has stagnated for decades. The central government in Mexico City barely governs the region. Local Californios, Mexican settlers, often feel more loyalty to their own ranchos than to distant Mexico City. Meanwhile, a trickle of American settlers has been arriving. Not the flood pouring into Texas, but enough to worry Mexican authorities. April 1846. Governor Jose Castro orders American settlers to leave California. The Americans refuse. Instead, in the small town of Sonoma, a handful of American settlers stage a revolt. They capture the local Mexican garrison, all of 24 soldiers, and raise a homemade flag featuring a grizzly bear. The Bear Flag Revolt. Sounds dramatic. In reality, it's about 30 Americans seizing a sleepy town that most Mexicans didn't care about anyway. What makes it significant is who shows up next. Captain John C. Fremont. Fremont is supposedly conducting a Pacific Coast survey for the U.S. Army Corps of Topographical Engineers. He has 60 armed civilians with him. They're heavily armed for surveyors. While in Oregon, Fremont receives vague orders from Washington regarding California. The messages are cryptic, carefully worded to provide plausible deniability. They never explicitly tell him to start a war, but they hint strongly that Polk would appreciate California coming under American control. Fremont decides to interpret these hints liberally. He moves south into California and links up with the Bear Flaggers. Now, the rebellion has professional military leadership and 60 armed men who know what they're doing. Fremont has no direct orders to intervene militarily. He's acting entirely on his own initiative, or insubordination, depending on how you look at it. The situation gets more complicated on July 7th. Commodore John D. Sloat arrives with the U.S. Pacific Squadron. He's been cruising off the Mexican coast, waiting for news about whether war has been declared. When Sloat hears about fighting in Texas, he decides to act. He lands Marines and occupies the ports of San Francisco and Monterey. He assumes Fremont is following orders from Washington and is operating under proper authority. When Sloat learns that Fremont has no such orders, he's horrified. This unauthorized military action could trigger an international incident. Sloat resigns due to illness, probably stress from realizing he's been dragged into an unauthorized war. His replacement, Commodore Robert Stockton, has no such qualms. Stockton willingly continues supporting Fremont. Together they form the California Battalion and march south along the coast. They occupy towns with minimal resistance. Most are barely defended. August 13th, 1846. American forces capture Los Angeles. Stockton issues a proclamation declaring all of Alta California to be United States territory. The conquest seems complete and absurdly easy. Too easy. September 1846. About 100 Californios, Mexican settlers, recapture Los Angeles from the 48 American troops left to defend it. Turns out occupying a town is easier than holding it when you impose harsh martial law on the population. Stockton's occupation had been heavy-handed. Movement restrictions, arbitrary arrests, confiscation of property. The local Californios had tolerated Mexican rule for decades. American rule, they discover, is worse. Now the Americans control the coast, but the Mexicans control the interior. Small-scale fighting erupts across Southern California. Neither side has enough troops for major battles. It's a guerrilla war of raids and ambushes. Meanwhile, approaching from the east, comes General Stephen Kearny's Army of the West. Kearny left Fort Leavenworth in June with 1,500 volunteers. Frontiersmen, Mormon settlers, adventurers looking for excitement. They marched 1,600 kilometers in just 6 weeks along trails previously established by American fur traders. Those trading relationships prove valuable. Some American traders have good relations with Mexican civic leaders. When Kearny arrives at Santa Fe, the capital of New Mexico, local leaders decide resistance is pointless. Santa Fe surrenders without a fight. Kearny proclaims himself Governor of New Mexico. He sets up an occupation government. Then he receives word that California is secure, already conquered by Stockton and Fremont. So Kearny sends most of his force south to attack Chihuahua and continues to California with only 100 men. This proves to be a terrible mistake. When Kearny reaches California, he discovers Los Angeles is in Mexican hands. His intelligence was completely wrong. Now he has 100 exhausted troops who've just marched across a desert, and he's facing organized Mexican resistance. But Kearny decides to attack anyway. December 6th, 1846. The Battle of San Pascual. Mexican lancers, cavalry armed with long spears. Well face Kearny's dragoons. The Americans are mounted infantry, trained to ride to battle and then fight on foot. The Mexicans are true cavalry, trained to fight from horseback. In close combat, lancers have a devastating advantage. The Mexican horsemen tear through Kearny's formation. Lances outreach swords and bayonets. American soldiers are pulled from their horses and stabbed before they can fight back. 18 Americans killed. 13 wounded, including Kearny himself. It's a humiliating defeat for the supposedly unstoppable American army. Mexican lancers prove that superior horsemanship and traditional weapons can defeat modern forces in the right circumstances. Kearny retreats and sends for reinforcements. Stockton marches south from San Diego with additional Marines and sailors. Together, they advance on Los Angeles with overwhelming force. General José María Flores, commanding the Mexican forces, attempts to disrupt the American advance. He attacks at the San Gabriel River, crossing on January 8, 1847. The battle goes poorly for Mexico. American artillery, better trained, better supplied, drives back the Mexican attacks. The next day, another engagement at La Mesa. Again, the Mexicans are defeated. Flores lacks the ammunition and supplies to sustain prolonged combat. January 13th. Mexican commanders surrender Los Angeles. After 6 months of scattered fighting across California, the Americans have won. But it's been messier and bloodier than anyone expected. The conquest of California, 1 million square kilometers, 100,000 new citizens, most of Mexican descent who didn't choose this private, and an estimated 150,000 indigenous people now under US authority. All achieved with just a few hundred troops and no official authorization. But now comes the awkward part. Who's actually in charge? Kearny claims to be governor of California based on his army commission. Fremont claims authority based on being there first and having Stockton's support. Stockton supports Fremont because they've been working together. It's a three-way power struggle with no clear resolution. Officers who should be celebrating victory instead argue about jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Mexican Californios watch this dysfunction and wonder what kind of government they've just been conquered by. Eventually, President Polk intervenes from Washington. He sides with Kearny. Fremont is ordered to step down. Fremont refuses. This act of insubordination gets him court-martialed. He's found guilty and dismissed from the army. Polk later pardons him, but Fremont's military career is over. The man who conquered California for the United States ends his service in disgrace. But Polk doesn't care about Fremont's hurt feelings. He has what he wanted. California. Just 2 years later, in January 1848, gold will be discovered at Sutter's Mill. The California gold rush will bring hundreds of thousands of settlers flooding west. California's population will explode. The territory will become economically vital almost overnight. But in 1846, nobody knows the gold is there. Polk just wants the Pacific coast. Coast-to-coast expansion. Manifest destiny. And he's willing to wage an unauthorized war to get it. The California campaign is remarkable for several reasons. First, it's conducted almost entirely without official orders. Fremont acts on vague hints. Sloat assumes war has been declared when it hasn't. Stockton continues operations he knows are unauthorized. Second, it involves tiny numbers of troops. The entire California campaign is fought with hundreds of soldiers, not thousands. Yet it conquers an area larger than France and Spain combined. Third, it's provestured. It happens simultaneously with the main war in Mexico. Taylor is fighting at Palo Alto and Resaca, while Fremont is raising the bear flag. Mexico is fighting a three-front war: Texas, New Mexico, California, and lacks the resources to defend any of them adequately. Fourth, the bear flaggers and early American settlers in California never really integrated into Mexican society. Like the American settlers in Texas a decade earlier, they remained culturally American, never learned Spanish, never accepted Mexican authority. They were Americans living on Mexican soil, waiting for an excuse to rebel. Fremont gave them that excuse. And fifth, some Californios actually supported the American takeover. They were frustrated with Mexico City's neglect. Decades of being ignored, of receiving no support, of watching their region stagnate. Some thought American rule might actually be better. They were wrong, as Stockton's harsh occupation would prove. But their initial willingness to collaborate made the conquest easier. By early 1847, California is American. New Mexico is American. Texas has been American since annexation. Mexico has lost half its territory. And the main American army under Zachary Taylor is about to push deeper into Mexico itself. President Polk is disappointed in Zachary Taylor. Taylor has won victories at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. He's crossed the Rio Grande and occupied Matamoros. But Polk wants more. He wants Taylor to push deeper into Mexico and force a surrender. There's also a political calculation. Taylor is a Whig. Polk is a Democrat. War heroes often become presidents. Just look at Andrew Jackson. Polk doesn't want a Whig general gaining too much glory and riding it to the White House. So Polk orders Taylor to advance on Monterrey, a major city in northern Mexico. Taylor now commands about 12,000 troops. 7,700 are volunteers, but only half are combat ready. Disease, desertion, and garrison duties have reduced his effective force to about 6,000. He marches in September 1846. Monterrey is defended by General Pedro de Ampudia with 7,000 Mexican troops. The city has several forts: Black Fort, Fort Tenaria, the bishop's palace overlooking the city from Independence Hill. Federation Hill provides another strong defensive position. Ampudia has spread his forces to cover all these positions. It's a classic defensive mistake. By trying to defend everything, he has insufficient reserves to reinforce any threatened point. Taylor's plan is straightforward. A diversionary attack in the east against the forts. The main assault in the west under General William Worth against the hills overlooking the city. Split the defenders' attention. Seize the high ground. Force Ampudia to abandon the city. It's a sound plan. But coordination between the two attacks breaks down immediately. September 20th. Worth's western column is supposed to move into position quietly. Instead, Mexican scouts discover them. Element of surprise, gone. But Worth adapts quickly. He repels a Mexican cavalry charge and continues his advance. September 21st. Worth assaults Federation Hill. Texas Rangers scout a path up the steep slopes. These frontiersmen know terrain better than any regular soldier. They find a route that Mexican defenders thought was too difficult to use. American troops scramble up the hillside. The Mexican defenders, surprised by the direction of attack, put up only brief resistance before falling back. Federation Hill falls to the Americans. First objective secured. Meanwhile, in the east, everything goes wrong. The attack is supposed to be a limited demonstration to fix Mexican forces in place. But eager officers, hungry for promotion and glory, decide to launch a full assault on Fort Teneria. They do this without proper reconnaissance, without artillery support, without coordination. It's a disaster. Black Fort and Fort Teneria rake the attacking Americans with musket and cannon fire. Men fall in rows. The first wave is shredded. Survivors scramble for cover behind buildings and walls. Some U.S. regulars reach Monterrey's outskirts. They push into the city streets, thinking they can exploit the breakthrough. Instead, they get lost in unfamiliar urban terrain. Mexican defenders know every alley and courtyard. Americans stumble into ambushes. Reinforcements arrive, but come under immediate heavy fire. Mexican positions have clear fields of fire across open approaches. American troops are pinned down. Officers fall, trying to rally their men. Finally, General John Quitman attacks Fort Teneria from a different direction. This catches the defenders by surprise. Brutal hand-to-hand fighting erupts in the fort. Bayonets, musket butts, men grappling in confined spaces. Fort Teneria falls. But at terrible cost. 400 American casualties. The only success in the eastern sector. A Tennessee soldier claims he was first over the parapet. He writes home proudly, "I discharged my pistol at a Mexican and guessed nothing but the bells and bones was found." He instantly fell. He was trying to load the cannon, but he was too late. I sent him to another world. Pride in killing. Bragging about sending a man to his death. This is what war does to young men. September 22nd. Fighting resumes at dawn. In the west, American artillery on captured Federation Hill fires down onto Independence Hill. The captured Mexican guns are now turned against their former owners. Worth orders an assault on Fort Libertad on Independence Hill. Defenders engage in brief hand-to-hand combat before falling back to the Bishop's Palace. The palace is the last major defensive position in the Western Heights. Mexicans attempt a counterattack to retake Independence Hill. It's poorly coordinated and lacks sufficient force. American troops repel it with disciplined volleys. By afternoon, all the Western Heights are in American hands. Worth can now fire artillery directly down into the city. In the east, Taylor waits for a Mexican counterattack that never comes. Ampudia is conserving his forces, hoping to defend the city itself. When no attack materializes, Taylor orders a renewed advance. September 23rd. The assault on Monterrey itself begins. This is urban warfare in its most brutal form. American forces advance from both east and west. Mexican resistance is fierce but weakening. They're running low on ammunition. They're exhausted from 3 days of continuous fighting. An American officer describes the scene. The street fight became appalling. The artillery of both sides raked the streets. Doors were forced open, walls were battered down, and the enemy driven from room to room and from house to house. Followed by the shrieks of women and the sharp crack of Texan rifles. It was indeed a most strange and novel scene of warfare. Civilians are caught in the crossfire. Women and children hiding in cellars as cannonballs crash through walls. Buildings destroyed. Fires spreading. The city being demolished around its inhabitants. Mexican soldiers fight from rooftops and windows. Americans advance by breaking through walls rather than using streets where they're exposed to fire. The fighting is house to house, room to room, brutal and close. By nightfall, on the 23rd, Ampudia realizes his position is hopeless. He's lost the heights. American artillery can pound the city at will. His ammunition is nearly exhausted. Continued resistance means the city's destruction and civilian deaths. The next morning, Ampudia requests terms. Taylor agrees to let the Mexican army withdraw with their small arms and personal weapons. They keep their honor. An 8-week ceasefire follows. Both sides need time to rest and resupply. The Battle of Monterrey, 500 US casualties, 360 Mexican. The bloodiest fighting of the war so far. Washington is furious. Polk wanted unconditional surrender. He wanted the Mexican army destroyed or captured. Instead, Taylor let them walk away with their weapons. The ceasefire gives Mexico time to reorganize and reinforce. But Taylor's troops desperately need the rest. They're exhausted, wounded, traumatized by urban combat. Disease is spreading through the camps again. And the ceasefire doesn't prevent further bloodshed anyway. American troops, especially Texas Rangers, rampage through Monterey. They ransack homes, burn buildings, loot property, kill civilians, rape women. Taylor eventually restores order, but only after days of atrocities. He acknowledges the harsh nature of campaigning in Mexico, but admits this did not excuse the crimes. Some officers are court-martialed. Punishments are light. Unit loyalty protects many perpetrators. Texas Rangers are especially shielded by their commanders, who view Mexican civilians as legitimate targets. The Monterey Massacre has consequences. In the United States, abolitionist newspapers seize on the atrocities as proof of the war's immorality. Is this the civilization we claim to bring to Mexico? They ask. Anti-war sentiment grows, especially in the north. In Mexico, the massacres spark guerrilla resistance. Civilians who might have accepted American occupation now join the resistance. Better to die fighting than submit to these barbarians, they say. Mexican priests encourage armed resistance. They tell their congregations that Americans will desecrate Catholic churches, that Protestant invaders will destroy their faith. The war takes on a religious dimension. Guerrilla attacks on American supply lines begin. A US officer reports the aftermath of one ambush. The bodies are strewn from this place, 2 or 3 miles. These bodies are the wagoners and men under command of Lieutenant Barber. They were attacked on a side hill, and the massacre continued throughout the entire length of the train. No survivors. No mercy. The guerrillas are as brutal as the Americans. The cycle of violence accelerates. Americans adopt harsh counterinsurgency tactics. Burn villages suspected of harboring guerrillas. Execute prisoners without trial. Collective punishment of entire communities. For every American killed, we burn 10 houses, becomes unofficial policy. This creates more guerrillas. Mexicans who lose their homes join the resistance. Americans respond with more reprisals. More Mexicans resist. The spiral continues. And then there are the deserters. Before the war even started, about 200 US troops had deserted to Mexico. Many joined a unit called the San Patricio Battalion, St. Patrick's Battalion. It's an artillery unit, 40% Irish. The rest a mix of German, Polish and Scottish immigrants. Almost all Catholic. They deserted for multiple reasons. Anti-Catholic prejudice in the American Army. Frederick Zay's "Goddamn Dutch" treatment. Religious kinship with Catholic Mexico. Mexican promises of land grants and higher pay. Some genuinely oppose the war as unjust. Mexico welcomes them. Gives them artillery training. forms them into a cohesive unit. They fight well, better than many Mexican units, because they're motivated volunteers rather than conscripts. Americans view them as the worst kind of traitors, men who abandoned their flag to fight for the enemy. If captured, they'll hang. The San Patricios know this, so they fight desperately. No surrender. No quarter. They'll face their fate at Churubusco. The ceasefire ends in November. No peace negotiations have succeeded. The war continues. But Polk has lost patience with Taylor. The Whig general is too independent, too popular with his troops, too dangerous politically. Polk is about to shift the war's focus away from northern Mexico toward a more decisive target, Mexico City itself. Antonio López de Santa Anna is back. The Americans thought they'd neutralized him. They let him through their naval blockade in August 1846 because he promised to make peace. "I'll accept Texas annexation," he said. "I'll end this war before it destroys Mexico." The Americans believed him. Within weeks of returning to Mexico, Santa Anna raised 25,000 troops and marched north. Not to negotiate, to annihilate Taylor's army. "I fooled the Yankees," he reportedly laughed. By January 1847, Santa Anna is back in power. His political enemies have been sidelined. He commands the largest Mexican army assembled during the war. And he has a plan. Santa Anna knows that General Winfield Scott is preparing an amphibious invasion at Veracruz. Scott has stripped most of Taylor's healthy troops for this coastal campaign. Taylor has been left with a skeleton force in northern Mexico. Santa Anna sees an opportunity. Crush Taylor's weakened army in the north. Then turn south to defend Veracruz. Defeat the Americans in detail. He drives his army hard through brutal terrain. Desert, mountains, scarce water. He tells his troops, "Today you commence your march through thinly settled country without supplies and without provisions. But you may be assured that very quickly you will be in possession of those of your enemy and of his riches, and with them all your wants will be superabundantly supplied." It's inspiring rhetoric. The reality is brutal. Santa Anna loses about 4,000 men before even reaching Taylor. Disease, desertion, exhaustion. Men simply collapse on the march and are left behind. But he still has 15,000 troops when he reaches Buena Vista in late February. Taylor has fewer than 5,000. February 22nd, 1847. The battle begins. Santa Anna's artillery opens fire. Mexican cavalry probes for weaknesses in the American line. They find a gap on the American left flank. Mexican horsemen charge through. For a moment, it looks like the American position will collapse. Volunteer units, poorly trained, facing combat for the first time, begin to break and flee. Then, American flying artillery saves the day. Horse-drawn guns gallop to the threatened sector. They unlimber and fire grape shot directly into the Mexican cavalry at close range. The effect is devastating. Horses and men fall in heaps. The cavalry charge breaks apart. But Santa Anna's biggest failure is coordination. He sends cavalry charges without infantry support. Infantry attacks without cavalry to exploit breakthroughs. Artillery fires without coordinating with ground assaults. Each arm of his military fights independently. American artillery picks them apart. The American volunteers, after their initial panic, then rally and hold the line. Officers restore order. Men remember their training. They prove they can stand against regulars when properly led. By the end of February 23rd, Santa Anna's attacks have stalled. He's suffered 2,700 casualties. Most are listed as missing, meaning they deserted during or after the battle. American casualties, 650. During the night, Santa Anna withdraws. He leaves campfires burning to disguise his retreat. When American scouts investigate the next morning, the Mexican army is gone. Santa Anna has failed. He cannot crush Taylor. He cannot prevent Scott's invasion at Veracruz. Mexico's best chance for a knockout blow has evaporated. The defeat at Buena Vista is a turning point. Santa Anna's army disintegrates on the march back south. More desertions. More deaths from disease and exhaustion. By the time he reaches central Mexico to face Scott's invasion, he's lost half his force. The northern front stabilizes. Taylor has won his last major battle. He'll remain in northern Mexico as an occupying force, but the main action now shifts to Scott's campaign. Meanwhile, the guerrilla war intensifies. Every American supply convoy runs a gauntlet. Wagons are ambushed on isolated roads. Drivers are killed. Supplies stolen or destroyed. Scott calls in troops experienced in counterinsurgency from Taylor's theatre. Men who've learned brutal tactics fighting guerrillas in northern Mexico. They bring those tactics south. Villages suspected of harboring guerrillas are burned. Civilians are executed on suspicion of collaboration. Collective punishment becomes standard practice. The guerrillas respond in kind. They show no mercy to captured Americans. Torture. Mutilation. Bodies left in public as warnings. It's a vicious cycle with no end in sight. Each atrocity justifies the next. Each reprisal generates more resistance. The war is no longer just battles between armies. It's a bitter insurgency that will continue even after the conventional war ends. This is the reality of occupation. The United States has military superiority, better artillery, better logistics, better training. But none of that matters against an enemy who melts into the civilian population and strikes from ambush. American soldiers learned to trust no one. Every Mexican is a potential guerrilla. Every village a potential ambush site. The paranoia breeds more atrocities. And all eyes now turn to Veracruz, where General Winfield Scott is about to launch the most ambitious campaign of the war. A march on Mexico City itself. General Winfield Scott doesn't look like Zachary Taylor. Where Taylor is casual and approachable, Scott is rigid and formal. Where Taylor dresses like a farmer and Scott wears immaculate uniforms with every button polished. The troops call him Old Fuss and Feathers. It's not a compliment. But Scott is a brilliant strategist. He understands logistics. He plans meticulously. And he's about to attempt something the Duke of Wellington himself says is impossible. March 9th, 1847. Scott lands 12,000 troops near Veracruz. It's the first major amphibious operation in U.S. military history. Navy ships transport soldiers in surf boats to the beaches. Mexican forces watch from the city walls, but don't contest the landing. A tactical error that will cost them dearly. Scott quickly establishes siege lines around Veracruz. The city is heavily fortified with thick walls and determined defenders. A direct assault would cost thousands of lives. So Scott decides to pound it into submission. For 3 weeks, American artillery bombards Veracruz day and night. Shells crash into buildings. Fires spread through residential neighborhoods. Civilian casualties mount. The Mexican governor protests the bombardment of civilians. Scott responds coldly. Military necessity. If the garrison surrenders, the bombardment stops. March 29th. After 3 weeks of relentless shelling, Veracruz surrenders. Scott keeps his word. No massacre. No atrocities. Strict discipline is enforced. Soldiers who loot or assault civilians are court-martialed and punished. It's a deliberate strategy. Scott has learned from Taylor's mistakes at Monterrey. Atrocities create guerrillas. Discipline wins cooperation. The occupation of Veracruz goes smoothly. Mexican civilians, expecting brutality, are surprised by American restraint. Some even begin providing intelligence and supplies. But Scott has no time to consolidate. Yellow fever season is approaching. The coastal lowlands become a death trap in summer. Scott must move his army inland to higher, healthier ground immediately. He marches west along the National Highway, a well-maintained road built during the colonial era. Ironically, Spanish infrastructure now aids the American invasion. Santa Anna is waiting. After his defeat at Buena Vista, Santa Anna has rushed south with what remains of his army. He establishes a defensive position at Cerro Gordo, a mountain pass where the national highway threads through narrow terrain. Santa Anna has 12,000 men positioned on commanding heights. The American army will have to advance through a bottleneck under fire from above. It's a perfect defensive position. Santa Anna is so confident he leaves some hills undefended. They're too steep for artillery. No army could haul cannons up those slopes. He's right about conventional armies, but American engineers are unconventional. Captain Robert E. Lee scouts the terrain. He discovers paths through dense vegetation on the impossible hills. Narrow, treacherous, but passable. Scott orders his engineers to widen these paths. Soldiers use ropes and pulleys to haul artillery pieces up the slopes. It's back-breaking work. Men strain against the weight of guns designed to be pulled by horses on flat ground. But they succeed. April 18th. American infantry assault from the front. It's a diversion. The real attack comes from those impossible hills. Suddenly, Mexican defenders find American artillery firing down into their positions. From hills they thought couldn't be climbed. From directions they never anticipated. Panic spreads through Mexican ranks. How did they get guns up there? The defensive line collapses. Mexican casualties are heavy, though exact numbers are unknown. Hundreds killed in the retreat. Santa Anna forced to abandon artillery and supplies. Even his personal belongings, including his wooden leg from an earlier war, are captured as trophies. The leg now sits in the Illinois State Military Museum, a humiliating souvenir of defeat. But the victory has a dark side. American troops also kill many soldaderas. The women who followed Mexican armies are caught in the crossfire and cut down in the retreat. A US trooper recalls, "The most distressing of all was the sight of hundreds of dead soldaderas scattered among the bodies of their men. Women who marched through deserts to cook and care for soldiers. Women who kept armies functioning when official logistics failed. Now dead in a ravine, forgotten by history." Scott's army continues west. Mexican guerrillas harass every step. Supply wagons ambushed. Messengers killed. Stragglers disappear. Disease takes a mounting toll. Yellow fever. Malaria. Dysentery. Men sicken and die far from any battlefield. President Polk is appalled by what he sees as Scott's great military error. Why does he pause? Polk demands. Why doesn't he march directly to Mexico City? Foreign observers are equally skeptical. The Duke of Wellington, Britain's greatest living general, assesses Scott's situation and predicts disaster. "Scott is lost," Wellington declares. He cannot capture Mexico City, and he cannot fall back upon his base. His army will be destroyed in Mexico. Wellington knows the dangers of overextended supply lines. He remembers Napoleon's catastrophic retreat from Moscow. Scott is attempting something similarly ambitious, marching deep into enemy territory with vulnerable logistics. But Scott has a plan Wellington doesn't anticipate. He stops at Puebla, a major city 100 kilometers from Mexico City. To his general's surprise, he establishes a new base and waits. For 10 weeks, officers are baffled. Why are we waiting? The city is within reach. Why pause now? So, no passes. What CTL? Scott's strategy is methodical. First, let troops rest and recover from disease. Sick men can't fight. Better to wait until they're healthy. Second, resupply thoroughly. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything needed for a major campaign. Third, gather intelligence on Mexico City's defenses. Scout routes. Identify weak points. Plan the assault carefully. Fourth, win over the local population through disciplined occupation. No looting. No rape. No burning villages. Pay for supplies. Treat civilians with respect. It works. Puebla's citizens, expecting American brutality, find instead an army that pays its bills and punishes criminals in its ranks. Some begin cooperating, providing food, sharing intelligence, staying neutral rather than resisting. Scott is winning hearts and minds, not through propaganda, but through discipline and restraint. Meanwhile, Santa Anna uses the time to raise another army. National Guardsmen from across Mexico concentrate in the Valley of Mexico. By August, he has about 30,000 troops. But there are problems. Soldiers aren't being paid regularly. One report describes the frustration. Hard-working and honest artisans have abandoned their houses and families because they believe they would be here only a month at most. But when they see that combat is postponed and their families suffer the consequences, they will be able to do nothing except abandon the cause they embraced with such good faith. Morale problems undermine the Mexican army before fighting even begins. August 7th, 1847. Scott resumes his advance. Reinforcements have brought his effective strength to 10,000 combat-ready troops. He faces 30,000 Mexicans. 3-1 odds. Wellington's prediction seems increasingly likely. Santa Anna positions many troops around El Peñón, a heavily fortified hill covering the main approaches to Mexico City. Causeways run through flooded fields toward the city. Attack along these causeways means advancing under fire with no room to maneuver. Scott's scouts report El Peñón is too strong for a frontal assault. So Scott does what he did at Cerro Gordo. He finds another way. He diverts his army south toward the Pedregal, an area of broken volcanic rock. It looks impassable. jagged lava fields stretching for kilometers. Santa Anna assumes no army can cross it. American engineers prove him wrong. They expand a mule path through the volcanic wasteland. Soldiers clear rocks. Widen the trail. Move artillery through piece by piece. While this work continues, Santa Anna orders General Gabriel Valencia to fall back to San Angel with his 5,000 troops. Valencia is a political rival of Santa Anna. He ignores the order. Instead, Valencia positions his forces in hills overlooking Padierna. He assumes the Pedregal is impassable. Scott cannot bring his army through that volcanic wasteland, he declares confidently. When Valencia hears that American troops are moving through the Pedregal behind him, he reportedly replies, "No, no, you're dreaming, man." He's not dreaming. August 19th. Americans attack Valencia from multiple directions. Some distract with a frontal assault. Others emerge from ravines directly into his camp. The Americans fire one volley, then charge with bayonets. Mexican troops scatter in panic. Valencia's army disintegrates. 700 killed, 1,200 wounded, 850 captured, including 4 generals. American casualties, around 60. It's a one-sided massacre. Valencia's overconfidence and insubordination have destroyed his entire force. Santa Anna withdraws to the Churubusco River. A fortified monastery and earthworks protect the crossing. It's the last major defensive line before Mexico City itself. Scott orders immediate pursuit. He wants to maintain momentum. Keep the Mexicans reeling. But his troops are exhausted. They lack proper scouting. Artillery support is inadequate. They're about to face the bloodiest fighting of the entire war. The San Patricio Battalion knows this is their last stand. These Irish deserters, along with German, Polish, and Scottish immigrants who joined them, are manning artillery in the fortified monastery at Churubusco. They know if they're captured, they'll hang as traitors. Better to die fighting than on a gallows. August 20th, 1847. American forces assault the Churubusco crossing. Mexican defenders pour devastating fire onto the attackers. The fortified monastery provides excellent defensive positions. Thick stone walls. Clear fields of fire. The small moat slows American advances. Americans attempt a flanking attack. Mexican troops defeat it with disciplined volleys. Frontal assaults stall under concentrated fire. A Mexican observer watches Americans fall. The Yankees died like ants. Bodies pile up in the killing zone. Officers lead charges and fall. Sergeants step up and also fall. The Americans keep coming anyway. Wave after wave. the San Patricios serve their guns with deadly precision. Grape shot scythes through American ranks. They're fighting for their lives. Every shot carefully aimed. Every round counts. The battle rages for 3 hours. Then, Mexican ammunition runs critically low. Barrels overheat from continuous firing. Powder residue clogs mechanisms. The same fouling problems that plagued Mexican muskets at Palo Alto now affect artillery. Rate of fire slows. Mexican defenses weaken. American troops capture the bridge. Now they can attack the monastery from 2 directions. Mexican defenders are surrounded. The San Patricios want to fight to the death, but Mexican officers order surrender. The position is hopeless. Continued resistance means everyone dies. When American troops enter the monastery, they find 72 members of the San Patricio Battalion. The Irishmen know what comes next. American casualties at Churubusco: 137 killed, 865 wounded, 38 missing. About 12% of the attacking force. Mexican casualties: approximately 1,000 killed or wounded. 2,000 more captured. Despite heavy losses, Santa Anna successfully withdraws most of his forces to Mexico City. Both sides are exhausted. August 24th. A truce is declared. Negotiations begin for a permanent peace. But positions are too far apart. Mexico demands the Rio Grande border only. No California. No New Mexico. The United States refuses. Santa Anna uses the ceasefire to strengthen Mexico City's defenses. Repairs fortifications. Stockpiles ammunition. Brings in reinforcements. After 2 weeks, the truce collapses. War resumes. Scott's options are limited. Flooded fields force his troops along elevated causeways toward fortified gates. Direct assault will be costly. He decides to attack Chapultepec Castle first. Chapultepec sits on a prominent hill overlooking approaches to the city. It's Mexico's military academy. 800 defenders, including 50 teenaged cadets. American intelligence reports that El Molino del Rey, a complex of buildings near Chapultepec, contains a cannon foundry. If true, it must be destroyed. September 8th. General Worth leads an assault on El Molino del Rey. Worth thinks the position is lightly defended or abandoned. He's wrong. Mexican troops hidden in the buildings wait until Americans are close. Then open fire at point-blank range. The first wave is decimated. Mexicans counterattack with bayonets. Hand-to-hand combat in the rubble. Americans fall back, rally, attack again. Brutal seesaw battle for hours. Mexican cavalry attempts to exploit the chaos. But as always, they attack without coordinated infantry support. American artillery pivots to face the horsemen. Grape shot tears through the cavalry charge. Eventually, American artillery and superior numbers prevail. Mexicans withdraw. Americans occupy El Molino del Rey. Then they discover there's no cannon foundry. The intelligence was completely wrong. 800 American casualties. Perhaps 2,000 Mexican. All for buildings with no strategic value. Now comes Chapultepec. September 12th. American artillery bombards the castle all day. Shells crash into stone walls. Defenders crouch behind parapets. The teenaged cadets help serve guns and carry ammunition. September 13th. The assault begins at dawn. American troops advance from 3 directions carrying scaling ladders. They must climb the castle walls under fire. A Mexican battery on the Tacubaya Road opens fire. Cannonballs plow through one American column. The column halts temporarily, then reforms and continues. At the walls, defenders push down scaling ladders. Americans climb again. Ladders fall again. Mexican muskets fire down from above. Americans fire back from below. General Pillow is wounded, leading the assault. Many officers fall. But Americans keep climbing. Finally, they crest the walls. Pour over the parapets. Hand-to-hand combat on the ramparts. Mexican muskets fail. Weeks of fighting without proper cleaning. Mechanisms jammed with powder residue. Won't fire. Soldiers reduced to bayonets and clubbed muskets. American troops show little mercy. Most defenders are killed in close combat. 6 cadets become legendary. Los Niños Héroes, the boy heroes. Juan de la Barrera, Juan Escutia, Francisco Marquez, Agustín Melgar, Fernando Montes de Oca, Vicente Suarez. Ages 13 to 19. They refuse to retreat or surrender. Fight until killed. Legend says Juan Escutia wrapped himself in the Mexican flag and jumped from the castle roof to prevent its capture. There's no reliable contemporary evidence for the flag story. But the core truth remains. Young cadets died defending their school against overwhelming odds. Modern historians debate exact details. Some cadets may have died earlier in the bombardment. The flag story was possibly embellished later. But Los Niños Héroes are sacred to Mexican memory, commemorated annually. A monument at Chapultepec honors them. Symbols of Mexican resistance and sacrifice. By day's end, Chapultepec is in American hands. The way to Mexico City's gates is open. Scott doesn't pause. Orders immediate assault on San Cosme and Belen gates. Keep the Mexicans reeling. Don't give them time to reorganize. The gates are isolated now. Defenders cut off from reinforcement. But they still fight desperately. First attacks are repelled. Mexican defenders pour fire from gate fortifications. Americans bring up artillery. Batter the gates at close range. Stone walls crumble. American infantry advance on San Cosme under cover of an old aqueduct. The colonial-era structure provides covered approach. Spanish infrastructure again aids American invasion. Fighting spreads into streets beyond the gates. House to house. Room to room. Civilians trapped in their homes. Urban warfare chaos. After 2 hours of brutal combat, Americans secure both gates. Casualties: 850 Americans, 3,000 Mexicans. The bloodiest day since Churubusco. During the night, Santa Anna evacuates with 5,000 troops. Joins 7,000 more outside the city. Plans to continue resistance from the provinces. September 14th, 1847. American troops march into Mexico City. The capital has fallen. But the war isn't over yet. Mexico City erupts in violence. American troops expected a quiet occupation. Instead, poorer districts explode with resistance. Local residents and National Guardsmen who stayed behind attack US soldiers in the streets. Sniper fire from rooftops. Ambushes in narrow alleys. Americans take casualties from an enemy they can't see. A monk from the convent of Merced rides through the streets on horseback brandishing a lance. "Defend your homes," he shouts. "Defend your faith. The Protestant invaders will defile our churches." Other priests do the same. Urging people to defend themselves, one report notes. Exhorting them to make war. Religious fervour intensifies the fighting. This isn't just national resistance. It's holy war against Protestant invaders. But Mexico City is divided. Wealthier residents oppose further resistance. They worry about property damage. Their businesses are already suffering. More fighting means more destruction. They offer support to Scott instead. One observer notes the class division. The shooting was neither started nor sustained by the respectable people of this capital, but instead by a few from the lower people without noble sentiments. Even in resistance, Mexican elites distance themselves from the poor. Scott responds with strict martial law. Patrols sweep through rebellious neighborhoods. Suspected insurgents are arrested. Some are executed without trial. But Scott also maintains discipline among his own troops. no mass atrocities like Monterrey. Soldiers who loot or assault civilians face courts-martial. Selective punishment rather than indiscriminate violence. The combination of force and discipline works. By September 15th, resistance fades. Insurgents realize the hopelessness of their situation. Americans are too strong, too numerous, too well organized. The city settles into uneasy occupation. Santa Anna watches from outside the city. He doesn't attempt to retake the capital. He realizes it's lost. Instead, he orders an attack on vulnerable American units at Puebla. If he can cut Scott's supply line, perhaps force an American withdrawal. But reinforcements from Veracruz arrive just in time. Santa Anna's attack is prevented. His timing is wrong. His forces insufficient. The remnants of Santa Anna's last army begin to disperse. Soldiers desert and go home. Units dissolve. Organized Mexican military resistance collapses. The war is effectively over. Except for the guerrillas. In the countryside, irregular forces continue fighting, ambushing supply convoys, attacking isolated American detachments, making occupation costly and dangerous. But without a functioning Mexican government or regular army, the guerrillas cannot force American withdrawal. They can only make occupation painful. And what of the San Patricios? The 72 captured at Churubusco face military tribunals. The proceedings are swift. The verdict predetermined. 50 are sentenced to death by hanging. The rest receive flogging and branding. The letter D for deserter burned into their cheeks. The executions are designed for maximum psychological impact. Some San Patricios are hanged within sight of Chapultepec Castle. They're forced to watch the American flag raised over the castle, the final symbol of Mexican defeat, before the trapdoors open beneath them. It's brutal, calculated, meant to deter future desertions. In Ireland and across Catholic America, the executions spark outrage. They were fighting for religious freedom, some argue. They were traitors who deserved worse, others respond. The debate continues to this day. Mexico City remains under American occupation. General Scott establishes military government. He tries to win Mexican cooperation through relatively benign policies. Pay for requisitioned supplies. Punish American soldiers who commit crimes. Respect Mexican institutions where possible. It's more successful than Taylor's harsh occupation in the North. But occupation is still occupation. No amount of politeness changes the fundamental reality. Day physician, foreign troops control the capital. Mexican politicians fracture into factions. Some want to continue fighting. Others recognize defeat and seek terms. Still, others collaborate with Americans, hoping to gain advantage. The government that emerges is weak and divided. It lacks the authority or resources to expel American forces. It can only negotiate surrender terms. President Polk sends diplomat Nicholas Trist to negotiate. His instructions are clear: acquire California, New Mexico, and confirm the Rio Grande boundary. Trist and Mexican negotiators begin talks. The discussions drag on for months. Mexican negotiators try to salvage what they can. Keep California. Keep New Mexico. Establish the Nueces River boundary. The Americans refuse every compromise. They've won the war. They occupy the capital. They hold all the leverage. Some American politicians want more. Secretary of State James Buchanan supports annexing all of Mexico. Why stop at half, he argues. Take everything. But most lawmakers want the war to end. Occupation is expensive. Guerrilla attacks continue. American soldiers keep dying from disease. Public opinion is turning against the war. There are also racist objections to total annexation. Do we want millions of Mexicans as American citizens? Critics ask. Fear of absorbing a large non-white population limits expansionist ambitions. Practical limits matter too. America can occupy Mexico City. But occupying and governing all of Mexico? The guerrilla war would never end. The costs would be staggering. So Trist and Mexican negotiators work toward a compromise that satisfies no one but ends the war. February 2nd, 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed. Mexico cedes California and New Mexico to the United States. 1.3 million square kilometers. More than half of Mexico's pre-war territory. The Rio Grande becomes the Texas boundary. Mexican claims to the Nueces River are abandoned forever. In exchange, the United States pays $15 million, agrees to assume Mexican debts owed to American citizens, promises to stop Comanche raids from U.S. territory into Mexico, pledges to protect property rights of Mexicans living in ceded territories. The treaty grants these Mexicans American citizenship if they choose. Most do. What choice do they have? The border crossed them. Some Americans are outraged at the soft terms. We won. Why should we pay anything? But supporters argue the treaty restores neighborly relations and avoids permanent occupation. Both nations ratify the treaty. American troops begin withdrawing from Mexico. By summer 1848, the occupation ends. The forgotten war is over. 13,768 American soldiers dead. Only 1,733 killed in action. The rest died from disease. Mexican casualties harder to estimate. Approximately 5,000 battle deaths. Unknown numbers from disease and civilian casualties. And, just months after the treaty is signed, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. The gold rush begins. Polk's gamble pays off beyond imagination. But the seeds of civil war have been planted. In Mexican soil. The treaty is signed, but the arguments begin immediately. In Washington, some politicians are furious that America didn't take more. Secretary of State James Buchanan pushes for annexing all of Mexico. We've won the war, he argues. Why settle for half? Vice President George M. Dallas agrees. Mexico has proven incapable of self-government, he declares. It's our duty to bring civilization to the entire nation. The racist paternalism is breathtaking. But most Americans want the war to end. Combat fatigue is widespread. Families want their sons home. The financial costs are mounting. And there are practical concerns. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina opposes total annexation for explicitly racist reasons. I know further, he says, that we have never dreamed of incorporating into our union any but the Caucasian race. To incorporate Mexico would be the first instance of incorporating an Indian race. I protest against such a union as that. The irony is thick. America conquers Mexican territory, but doesn't want the Mexican people. Wants the land, but not its inhabitants. There are also fears about slavery's expansion. If all of Mexico becomes American territory, will it be slave states or free states? The question that's been tearing at America since the Missouri Compromise of 1820 now threatens to explode. The treaty passes. Narrowly. With bitter opposition from both those who wanted more territory and those who opposed the war entirely. May 1848. President Polk negotiates another treaty. This one with Britain regarding the Oregon Territory. The US-Canadian border is established at the 49th parallel. By mid-1848, the borders of the contiguous United States are essentially those we know today. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, from Canada to Mexico. A continental nation forged in just 2 years of war. The human cost? Staggering. American mobilization, over 100,000 men. Little experience in major interstate war before this. The United States had fought Britain twice and various indigenous nations, but never conducted campaigns on this scale. 13,768 American soldiers died. Only 1,733 were killed in action. The rest, over 11,000, died from disease. Typhus, cholera, dysentery, yellow fever, malaria. The 13% mortality rate is the highest of any American war, higher than the Civil War. higher than World War I, higher than World War II. When measured by percentage of forces deployed, the Mexican-American War was the deadliest conflict in US history. Mexican casualties are harder to estimate. Approximately 5,000 killed in battle. Perhaps 10,000 total military deaths when disease is included. Civilian casualties unknown but significant. The fighting in Monterrey killed civilians. The bombardment of Veracruz killed civilians. Urban warfare in Mexico City killed civilians. Guerrilla war and counterinsurgency killed civilians across the country. Women who followed armies, the soldaderas, died at Cerro Gordo and other battles. Their deaths aren't included in military casualty figures. They're simply forgotten. The economic costs tell their own story. The war cost America approximately $100 million. A massive sum for the 1840s. The entire federal budget before the war was only about $50 million annually. But California's gold makes it all worthwhile. January 1848. Just weeks before the treaty is signed, James W. Marshall discovers gold at Sutter's Mill in California. By 1849, the gold rush is underway. Hundreds of thousands flood west seeking fortune. California's population explodes. Ships abandon crews in San Francisco Harbor as sailors rush to the gold fields. Entire towns are built and abandoned within months. The gold from California will be worth hundreds of millions. Eventually, billions. Polk's territorial gamble pays off beyond anyone's imagination, but Mexico loses its richest territory. The gold that could have funded Mexican development instead enriches America. The loss compounds Mexico's economic catastrophe. The war worsens every problem Mexico already had. Political instability intensifies. Military defeat discredits existing leaders. New factions emerge. More coups. More violence. The cycle continues for decades. Antonio López de Santa Anna returns to power one more time in the 1850s. He's finally permanently exiled in 1855. Dies in poverty in Mexico City in 1876. The man who dominated Mexican politics for 30 years ends in obscurity. Mexicans still debate his legacy. Defender of the nation or incompetent failure? Patriot or opportunist? For the soldaderas, there is no debate because there is no memory. The women who kept Mexican armies functioning, who foraged and cooked and nursed and marched through deserts, who died alongside the men they followed. History forgets them almost entirely. No monuments. No commemorations. Just scattered mentions in soldier diaries and officer reports. Their names lost. Their sacrifices unrecorded. But the Mexican-American War shapes American futures in profound ways. It creates presidents. Zachary Taylor rides his military fame to the White House in 1848. Old Rough and Ready wins the presidency as a Whig. He dies in office 16 months later after eating cherries and drinking milk at a 4th of July celebration. Franklin Pierce, a volunteer officer in the war, becomes president in 1853. He's a mediocre president who fails to prevent the slide towards civil war. Ulysses S. Grant becomes president in 1869. The man who dodged cannonballs in the chaparral and ordered men to lie down under fire. The quartermaster who learned logistics in Mexico. As president, Grant reflects on the war with bitter honesty. The Mexican War was the most unjust war ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation, he writes. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory. He continues, "We were sent to provoke a fight, but it was essential that Mexico should commence it. I had a horror of the Mexican War, and I have always believed that it was on our part most unjust." Then Grant makes a stunning claim. The Southern Rebellion was largely the outgrowth of the Mexican War. Nations, like individuals, are punished for their transgressions. We got our punishment in the most sanguinary and expensive war of modern times. Grant sees the Civil War as divine punishment for the Mexican War's injustice. And he's not entirely wrong about the connection. The territories acquired from Mexico reignite the slavery crisis. Will California be slave or free? What about New Mexico? Utah? The Missouri Compromise tried to maintain balance between slave and free states. But the Mexican territories upset that delicate equilibrium. 1846. Even before the war ends, Congressman David Wilmot of Pennsylvania proposes an amendment. The Wilmot Proviso would ban slavery in all territories acquired from Mexico. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of said territory, the amendment declares. It passes the House, where northern states have majority. It fails in the Senate, where southern states can block it. The proviso is reintroduced repeatedly over the next several years. Always passes the House. Always fails in the Senate. The repeated failures show the impossibility of compromise. 1850. The Compromise of 1850 attempts to settle the question. California admitted as a free state. New Mexico and Utah territories used popular sovereignty. Residents vote on slavery themselves. The slave trade abolished in Washington, D.C., but slavery itself remains legal there. Fugitive Slave Act strengthened, requiring northern states to return escaped slaves. The compromise satisfies no one. Abolitionists see each concession to slavery as moral failure. Slaveholders see each restriction as the beginning of abolition. Both sides understand the fundamental contradiction: America cannot be both half slave and half free forever. The Mexican territories force a choice. Northern vision: America as land of free labor. Free soil, free labor, free men. Economic opportunity without the competition of slave labor. Southern Vision: America as land where slavery can expand or die. Without new slave states to maintain Senate balance, slaveholders will be politically strangled. Abolition becomes inevitable unless slavery expands. These visions are irreconcilable. 1854. Violence erupts in Kansas. Bleeding Kansas becomes a dress rehearsal for civil war. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers battle for control. John Brown and his sons kill 5 pro-slavery settlers at Pottawatomie Creek. Pro-slavery forces sack the town of Lawrence. The violence spreads to the Senate floor. Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina beats Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts with a cane, nearly killing him. Southern congressmen send Brooks new canes inscribed, "Hit him again." The country is tearing itself apart. 1861. 15 years after the Mexican War ends, the Civil War begins. The scale is incomprehensible compared to Mexico. Mexican War: 13,000 American deaths over 2 years. Civil War: 620,000 deaths over 4 years. Mexican War: tens of thousands mobilized. Civil War: millions mobilized. And the generals? They learned their trade in Mexico. Ulysses S. Grant commands Union armies. The man who learned logistics marching through Mexico now besieges Vicksburg and Petersburg. The tactics he practiced at Resaca de la Palma, he perfects at Shiloh and the Wilderness. Robert E. Lee leads Confederate forces. The engineer who scouted impossible routes at Cerro Gordo now outmaneuvers Union armies at Chancellorsville. The captain praised by Winfield Scott as the very best soldier I ever saw becomes the South's greatest general. William Tecumseh Sherman learned logistics in Mexico. Now he burns Atlanta and marches to the sea. Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson served as an artillery officer in Mexico. Now he commands Confederate forces in the Shenandoah Valley until his death at Chancellorsville. George Meade, the Union victor at Gettysburg, was an engineer in Mexico. James Longstreet, George Pickett, Joseph E. Johnston, P. G. T. Beauregard. The list goes on and on. At Appomattox in April 1865, when Lee surrenders to Grant, it's a reunion of Mexican War veterans. Men who fought together against Santa Anna, now ending 4 years of fighting each other. Grant treats Lee with respect, allows Confederate officers to keep their sidearms, lets soldiers keep their horses for spring planting. The generous terms echo the ones that angered Polk at Monterey. Perhaps Grant remembers Mexico, remembers fighting in what he believed was an unjust war, remembers that soldiers on both sides are just following orders, remembers that enemies today might be allies tomorrow. The Mexican-American War also shapes how Americans think about expansion. The term manifest destiny is coined by journalist John O'Sullivan in 1845. The idea, America has a destiny, perhaps God-given, to dominate the North American continent, to spread democracy and Protestant Christianity, to civilize the inferior races. It becomes a powerful ideology, justifies westward expansion, justifies the displacement of indigenous peoples, justifies war against Mexico. But the reality is more complex than triumphalist narratives suggest. Many Americans opposed the war from the beginning. Whigs condemned it as unjust conquest. Abolitionists saw it as a slaveholder's plot. Religious leaders preached against it from their pulpits. Henry David Thoreau goes to jail rather than pay taxes supporting the war. His essay, Civil Disobedience, becomes a foundational text for nonviolent resistance movements worldwide. American soldiers themselves had mixed motivations. Few described the war as a racial or religious crusade. Most worried about practical concerns: getting promoted, getting paid, getting home to their families. Frederick Zay didn't fight for manifest destiny. He fought because he needed money, and Americans called him "goddamn Dutch." The Irish who joined the San Patricio Battalion fought for religious kinship with Catholic Mexico and because they faced discrimination in Protestant America. Volunteers from Tennessee and Kentucky fought for adventure and land grants. Mormon settlers fought because their leader, Brigham Young, negotiated a deal with the government. Human motivations are always more complex than grand ideologies suggest. And what about Mexico's defeat? Americans often attributed Mexican losses to inferior civilization or racial inferiority. These racist explanations dominated American thinking for decades. But the real reasons are more prosaic. Mexico lost because of political divisions. Centralists versus Federalists. Generals marching armies south to seize power instead of north to fight enemies. Leaders undermining each other. Mexico lost because of economic weakness. Couldn't match American industrial capacity. Couldn't manufacture weapons and ammunition at scale. Couldn't supply armies in the field. Mexico lost because of geographic disadvantages. America controlled rivers and seas. Mexican armies marched on foot through deserts. Mexico lost because of leadership failures. Santa Anna's repeated strategic blunders. Valencia's insubordination at Contreras. Failure to coordinate cavalry and infantry and artillery. Mexico lost because of logistical inadequacy. Dependence on soldaderas instead of professional supply systems. Irregular pay-driving desertion. Outdated weapons without the training and maintenance to keep them functional. But Mexican soldiers fought with remarkable courage. Lancers charged American artillery at San Pascual and won. defenders held Churubusco for 3 hours against overwhelming odds. Los Niños Heroes died defending their school. The San Patricios fought knowing capture meant hanging. Defeat doesn't equal cowardice. Sometimes the brave side loses. Today, the war's legacy shapes debates we're still having. Every argument about immigration traces back to 1848. Back to the treaty that took half of Mexico and turned it American. Back to families who lived in California or Texas or New Mexico for generations and woke up one morning as Americans. The border didn't cross them. They stayed exactly where they were. The border crossed them. Their descendants still navigate questions of belonging. Who is American? What does citizenship mean when your family never left home but home changed countries? The Mexican-American War shaped more than borders. It shaped American identity. The idea of manifest destiny. The vision of a continental empire. The belief that American expansion brings progress and civilization. It shaped Mexican identity. The sense of grievance against American aggression. The memory of territory stolen. The pride in resistance, even in defeat. Los Niños Heroes as national martyrs. It planted seeds that grew into the Civil War. Every debate about slave states versus free states in the new territories. Every compromise that satisfied no one. Every step closer to the violence that would kill 600,000. And it created relationships between neighbors that have never fully healed. From Oregon to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. These borders feel permanent, as if they've always existed. They haven't. 2 years, 1846 to 1848. That's all it took to redraw the map of North America. 13,768 American lives. Thousands of Mexican soldiers and civilians. Women who followed armies through deserts. Teenage boys defending a castle. Irish deserters hanging in sight of the American flag. All of them died for borders drawn in Mexico City and Washington. Lines on maps they never saw. This was a war of contradictions. American soldiers fighting bravely in a cause many believed was unjust. Ulysses S. Grant leading troops while convinced the war was the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. Mexican defenders showing remarkable courage while their leaders undermined each other with political games. Soldaderas keeping armies alive while official history forgot they existed. A war that gave America its modern shape but revealed divisions that nearly destroyed it. That created the territorial disputes which led directly to civil war. A war of technological innovation. Flying artillery changing battlefield tactics forever. Engineers finding paths through impossible terrain. America's first major amphibious operation. A war of brutal realities. Disease killing far more than bullets. Atrocities committed by both sides. Civilians caught between armies. Guerrilla warfare making occupation costly and bitter. Abraham Lincoln demanding Polk show him the exact spot where American blood was shed on American soil. Polk never answering because the question exposed the war's dubious origins. Santa Anna fooling the Americans twice. Signing treaties under duress, then renouncing them the moment he was free. A survivor who kept coming back until Mexico finally had enough. Los Niños Heros, wrapping themselves in flags and refusing to surrender. The San Patricios, knowing they'd hang but fighting anyway. Courage on both sides that deserves to be remembered. Today, we still live with this war's consequences. Every immigration debate traces back to 1848. Every question about who belongs in California or Texas or New Mexico. The descendants of people who never crossed a border. The border crossed them. The border crossed them. The war gave America its continental empire. But at what cost? Grant believed the Civil War was divine punishment for Mexican war injustice. 620,000 deaths to atone for territorial conquest. Whether you believe in divine punishment or not, the connection is undeniable. The territories seized from Mexico reignited the slavery crisis. Forced America to choose between irreconcilable visions of its future, led inexorably toward the bloodiest war in American history. This is the war that shaped America's borders. This is the war that trained Civil War generals. This is the war that nobody remembers, but everybody lives with.